we stop doing something because we know that it's not good for us, that's not quitting. That's just a redirection. Like you can't, um, I really don't think that when you really are at peace with yourself and you're constantly talking to that inner voice, I don't think you're ever really winning or losing. I think you're always just progressing. And, I heard a quote the other day that was like, a step back is just taking a step forward in the right direction. So I think that there is, maybe there is winning and losing in your mind, but if you can sort of reframe it for yourself, I think that you're always winning in a way.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of Oh My Curry Goodness, I talk to Gen Zers across different industries about their story and the experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. I created Oh My Curry Goodness because I want to know more about the behind the scenes of a person as opposed to their destination or their highlight reels. It's really important to talk about the behind the scenes part because these are some of the things that make us human beings. And so I wanted to create a podcast where we have that human element in it, where we don't just talk about them based on their title or what they have done as a or their destination, that we focus on the good and bad experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. So my goal for this podcast is to continue to emphasize the importance of having these behind the scenes conversations, what it's like to be a human being from the perspective of others, because they have their story and their perspectives are different from yours. So I hope you continue to check back each and every week to learn from incredible people of the Gen Z generation. Now, my guest this week is Hollis Belger, who is the founder of Juggling For Jude, a soccer-juggling fundraiser for St. Jude Children's Hospital. Since starting this fundraiser, she has raised more than $700,000 in order to help young people suffering from cancer. Now, raising that much money is never easy, and the fact that Hollis, while it's great to raise money, Hollis cares more about the personal connections he has had with patients, and it allows people to remember that they are human beings as well. Sure, and unfortunately, there are a lot of young people who are suffering from difficult circumstances, but just because of the difficult challenges they've had, they're still human beings at the end of the day. So I love interacting with people who want to continue emphasizing that, as I mentioned in the introduction. So I'm really excited to speak with someone like Hollis. So Hollis Belger, thank you so much for joining the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited. And I also think that what you speak about is really important and a beautiful subject. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And that really means a lot. And I say this a lot on this podcast, but I like to overthink on the podcast. So every time I do the introduction, I'm like, da 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 da. Okay, I feel like that didn't make sense. Da, 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 da. Okay, got it. So I'm like, okay, I hope everything works well. So I'm glad that you like it. I'm definitely not going to overthink the next time I do an interview, but um, but first things first, I just want to say congratulations because I know raising $700,000 is never an easy feat or is never an easy task. But I want to start from the beginning in the sense that volunteering, giving back is an important part of you. And I know that this is a really difficult question because technically we don't know the what if part. Like, we don't know what life would look like, or we don't know for certain what life would look like if we never got into this. So I do want to ask you, because one of the questions I would ask people is like, if you take something out of your life, what would you lose? I want to pose it to you in a different way, which is what would Hollis's life look like if you never got into philanthropy or giving back? Because that is something that's really important when it comes to like Hollis's purpose. So if that never existed, what would life look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be completely honest, it's really hard for me to imagine a life without philanthropic intent and without sort of considering, this idea of benevolence and upholding those values because it was always instilled in me from a really young age. I mean, I just come from two incredible parents who both really just value doing things for others. And that was sort of the norm. It wasn't charity wasn't necessarily a voluntary act. It was just sort of an inevitable thing that you did. And that's the way that my parents sort of framed what charity and philanthropy and giving back and volunteering your time and resources looked like. It was just something that you did because that's what human beings do. So for me, taking away some sort of sustained and committed philanthropic mission, I just feel like a part of myself would sort of be missing. And I think that in some way I would have been forced into, not forced into it, but just given into philanthropy to some extent or another. And it hasn't just been Juggling for Jude that has sort of unveiled my, sort of philanthropic tendencies, I guess. There have been other ways in my life that I try to give back, and I feel like I've given part of myself to other people and other causes. But if I did take that away, I think a big part of what I talk about through Juggling for Jude and other efforts has been this sense of purpose. And this, I talk about the importance of cultivating adolescent purpose, especially amongst the younger generations, especially after it was like COVID, I started doing this research and I saw so many of my friends kind of lose their love of life and their love for the things that they used to love. But I was still so invested in my fundraising and coming up with new and innovative ways to engage donors, via Zoom or social media or whatever it may be during that time. And so I think that I would lose that sense of purpose. I just don't think that I would have this drive and this this as motivated sense of living. I think that that's kind of what I would have lost.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And this is when I ask these types of questions, I ask them because it helps me understand more about I don't like asking people quote unquote, what is your why? Because because like everyone asks that question. So like I want to go like deep philosophical. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I'm really appreciative. Now, before we talk about this, before we move on, there is one thing that you mentioned, which is the sense of like giving back and helping people. And I just lost my trail of thought. Nope, got it back. I think that one of the difficult things about, and I'm explaining from like a broad sense, is that I think when it comes to philanthropy, I feel like there can be a pressure when it comes to helping people because you want to make sure that you do everything you can to make sure that they're doing good, whatever good looks like. So when I met you the first time, one of the things that was really important to you is like you're very people oriented. You like learning about people's stories. You like connecting with them on a personal level. So when it comes to like these things that make up Hollis, when it comes to like giving back, do you feel like there is a pressure to be like that best helper? Or tell me a bit about that relationship because you have good intentions, but sometimes helping people, and I've asked this so many times because it's such a really interesting question to ask. Like you have good intentions, but sometimes maybe the execution can go wrong. And because of that, sometimes you can be hard on yourself because you didn't make that person's day or didn't make that community better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a fear of failure in the philanthropic space. And there's this idea of like measuring impact. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? How do you actually measure your impact on others? How are you supposed to quantify that? I don't think you can. And, regardless of a lot of social and economic trends pushing towards this, and this is something that I'm interested in, this idea of like return on impact and return on investment and sort of the intersection of utilizing the corporate space and, to generate some sort of sustainable social impact or, whatever it may be. And I think it's just hard when you're a solo fundraiser, you're one person, and you sort of put this pressure on yourself to raise a certain amount of money or connect with a certain number of people or, hit a certain like threshold of impact that makes you successful in the philanthropic space. It's like that's what determines your success. And I don't really think I was ever driven by that. Obviously, as a fundraiser, I've always had some sort of numerical goal. And obviously, the 1 million is something that I'm still working towards and something I have been striving towards for years. And that's something to me that just feels fulfilling. And if I was never to get there, then I spent my whole life trying to get there. And that's that. And that is still an accomplishment in its own way, is that level of commitment and sustained effort. But I think for me, the most special part about giving back in this sort of sense of, philanthropy has been the connections with people. And I don't really think that you can, determine like, did I connect with that person? Did I make their day better? That's not necessarily, it's not like improving people's life. It's just connecting with them. That was like the kind of the second benefit that I think I would have lost if I wasn't in philanthropy. I've met and been able to connect with people across generational, racial, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic divides, and all of these relationships that I have fostered with all of these incredible individuals have really, really enriched my perspective on a number of different, topics and just in the world. And so I think that, whether it's speaking to a cancer patient at St. Jude or a CEO of a large company that donates a significant amount of their profits to St. Jude, it's like there are ways that you can connect with both parties. And there are also, but I don't really think that that should determine, well, did I make that person's day better? Or like, did I make that kid who, feel good about themselves? It's like, I think just talking to them and sometimes listening is the most powerful tool in gaining insight. And for me, I've been able to share with my donors, like, I spoke to this family or I spoke to this patient, and this is just something that I learned. And this is something that I think it's important that other people know. And whether that inspires a donation or not, it doesn't really matter. It's sort of just the connection and spreading awareness. And people tell me at St. Jude all the time, they say that the awareness and the mission of St. Jude that I'm spreading is equally as important as the money that I raise. And so I think that that's another really important factor.
One of the things I like talking on this podcast is focusing less on the destination and more on the journey. Now, here's why I say this, because I am speaking to you as someone who, well, not me. You were someone who won the Princess Diana Award, which is one of the biggest awards a young person can get. And I've had the chance to interview a lot of people who are a recipient of that. That's the destination part. I wanted focusing here's the crazy thing about your journey is that I think you started juggling for Jude since you were 9 years old, which for those who, and I'll explain a little bit more because I know it's a fundraiser, but basically one of the things that Hollis does is she juggles a soccer ball in order to raise money for cancer patients. And I think your record is 7,157, and that took 76 minutes. Now, here's the thing I want to ask you. I think for a lot of us, we are always faced with decisions. Is this the right decision to do this? Did I make the right decision to do this? And why I found this question, why I thought about asking you this is that it's very easy for a 9-year-old, or when you're a 9 years old, a 9-year-old doesn't know much about life, if you will, like they're still a kid. And then there's also the part where you're juggling it from, I guess, like from the outsider, it's like, oh, you're juggling a soccer ball to raise money. That's not something that we would normally think of. And then the thing is that I think I saw somewhere where when you raise enough money, you realize that this is something that you could do for life. Now, again, no one knows Hollis more than Hollis herself. That was very philosophical, by the way. No one knows Hollis more than Hollis herself. So I want to ask you this because I know there's a difference between a 9-year-old you and then the person you are today. I want to ask you throughout that journey, and forget the Diana Award, forget the material part where like you raised $700,000, forget the people that you got to work with, not just patients, but I mean like donors and CEOs and everyone else, soccer players as well. How did you know that this was the right decision for you? Because we don't know what the future will look like. We don't know if we're going to win the Diana Award. We don't know if we're going to raise this much money. But there was something that you loved about Juggling for Jude that maybe people don't understand. But at the same time, there's also those moments where you're like, well, I've had good days, but I've also had bad days. So during that journey, how did you know that at the end of the day, regardless of what's happening, good or bad, that this was the right space for you?
Yeah, such a great question and so beautifully worded. I think that like people ask me this kind of all the time and in a way it's like, well, did you, think that you were gonna raise $1 million, and did you think that you were gonna win award X, Y, and Z and be on the news or whatever and have this be some sort of like lifelong mission? And no, not at all. I literally, it's like what happened at 9 years old was exactly what a 9-year-old would think. My thing was I had this weird aptitude for juggling, and it was sort of unique to me. Like I would go to soccer practice and I would probably get the highest number, amongst the girls in my soccer practice. And I just joined a competitive soccer team. And I think that that was, like something that I really valued was like, I'm kind of good at this and kind of uniquely good at this. Like, I don't think that there are a bunch of other 9-year-olds that are juggling as often as I am, probably somewhere in the world. But, it was something that I felt very attached to. And it was receiving a lot of positive feedback from my teammates, from my parents, my coaches. It was like, wow, this girl really has this weird knack for juggling. And I sort of took ownership of that. And Juggling for Jude was supposed to be a single summer long fundraiser project, summer project, where my mom and I would go out to the track right behind my house. I live right behind my high school, or my future high school at the time. And I would say, can you film me, mom? And she would film my daily records for the day. I was getting 100 to 200 to 300 on average. Nothing crazy. Maybe a little crazy for a 9-year-old. And I think my goal was to raise about $1,000 that summer. I was like, that's pretty ambitious, but I think I can do it. My mom helped me set up a website. I don't even think I had an Instagram account the first summer. Like maybe I did. My mom was really running that stuff because, I don't really think a 9-year-old should be running her own Instagram account. But, we were sort of collaborating on this together. And she said, let's sit down, let's write a big newsletter to all of our family, friends, teachers, and extended family members, like anyone that I knew. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this summer, and St. Jude is something that is a cause that I really care about. And that's kind of a whole other story of how I really got connected with St. Jude. But like it was never, I never ever thought that I mean, I didn't really think I was going to do it past one summer. And the first summer I raised over $33,000. And that was sort of the aha moment at like, oh my God, this is not going to be just a summer project. This could be, a lifelong mission. And, but I think what's so important that you sort of alluded to is the good days and the bad days. Like I had moments where maybe I didn't want to juggle, or maybe I was questioning if it was the right decision. And I think that celebrating the small victories and taking it one step at a time is like the most important part. And you can't really get caught up in like am I doing enough? And is this enough? And I think I was just driven by different values. I wasn't driven by the outcomes. I was just driven by every penny was like just another contribution to a place that I was so passionate about helping. I think if you just aren't passionate about the cause that you are trying to fundraise for or help, of course you're going to be motivated by the external outcomes and accolades and achievements because you're not really motivated by what you're doing in the first place. So it is about the destination in that sense. But when it becomes about the journey is when every juggle was an accomplishment. Every touch was an achievement. Every day was that I went out to juggle was a destination in itself because that was the whole point. You know what I mean? So I think that when you redefine what the destination is and what those accolades and achievements are, you are hitting destinations every single day because you're just doing the thing. And I'll briefly talk about why St. Jude was so important to me. I think that like from a more philosophical and ethical standpoint, and I've had a lot of time to reflect on this, is like for me, childhood and the idea of being a kid was so important. I had like this weird attachment like to my childhood. I've always been a really sentimental person. I've always really valued just the beauty of being a kid. And the fact that there were kids all around the world who had their childhoods stripped from them because of a genetic mutation in their body, like that was unfathomable to me. And the fact that my parents own a small business and they work their butts off to support the life that they have given to me and my sister. And if God forbid my sister and I were ever put in that situation, there was a place that was able to financially support what costs thousands and thousands of dollars in pediatric cancer treatment. And so that, once again, every single day was a destination. And I think that that's why I knew it was the right decision because I wasn't even thinking about, I didn't even know what the Diana Award was. Like, I mean, all of these opportunities are so incredible and have definitely, accelerated my project in a number of ways, but those were never the only destinations. And that was a really long answer to your question, but yeah, that's kind of what I think made me successful, I guess.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's a great answer and it's a very complicated question. So I really do appreciate it. You answered it perfectly. And I think I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Like one of the reasons why I sometimes fear the idea of getting awards is like sometimes I'm worried about like if I'm using people as like I guess like bait or like this is a dark word, but like a hostage in a sense, where it's like, yeah, I'm only using this because I want to get this. And so it almost feels like you're dehumanizing people because you're not valuing them. You're valuing something like that more materialistic kind of thing. And that's actually what I want to, and it leads me to something I'm really interested in knowing about, which is, well, not so much the material, like the good part, but maybe the like I guess the thoughts of other people. Like you mentioned how every juggle, every touch served as a purpose. And I'm wondering when you told people like this, do you feel like you were ever truly authentic in the sense of like you when you said this, you were saying this with a smile on your face in the sense of like, Hollis, you're very like you're a very positive oriented, energetic person, not like you not smiling in the sense where it's like, yeah, I'm juggling, and then you're laughing as if like you're joking. I don't know if that makes sense, but like when you're telling people like what you're doing or the fact that you said like every juggle, every touch served as a purpose, do you feel like you were able to say that with like in seriousness, or did it take some time before? Because like it maybe you there was a time where like you're kind of scared to tell that to people because it's not something that we've ever seen in the past.
Right. I mean, I think, even as a 9, 10, potentially even like 11-year-old, I don't know if I really fully understood the gravity of what cancer was. You know what I mean? Like, but I don't really think I needed to. That wasn't really the point. I knew that kids got really, really sick and they lived in a hospital and that was like their life and that's all I kind of really needed to understand at the time. And of course over the years I've really delved into more of like the scientific research and the importance of like what actually goes on in your body when you're undergoing treatment. And then another huge part has been understanding the long-term effects of pediatric cancer treatment. Some I have seen manifested, especially through a lot of my close friends that, survived and were treated. And, 4 years out of remission, they still face and confront 4 to 40 years out of remission. A lot of these patients, former patients, are battling a lot of physical repercussions with their health. So I think that, for me to go up to donors, like I just think about some donor interactions that I've had in the past when I was a lot younger, just the fact that a 10-year-old was coming up to them and saying like, I juggle my soccer ball for St. Jude. And St. Jude is a globally recognized hospital, especially amongst the older generations. And that's something that they're working on right now, is shepherding the next generation. But the fact that a girl was even doing that, like I don't really think like I don't really think they were questioning my sincerity or my authenticity, because it was like, what kid is juggling their soccer ball for cancer at this age? Like it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like I think that it was so, refreshing maybe for adults to even see that it was never a question like, is this girl really happy? Is this girl really wanting to do it? At the end of the day, like, who was really caring if this 10-year-old was doing it because her mom was making her, or because she, felt like she had to, or because she knew, or she had a friend who was undergoing treatment, or, because like of X, Y, and Z, like who cares what her motivations were? I think it was just something that people were sort of refreshed to see. And I think that is, it wasn't like it was a bake sale or a lemonade stand, which, don't get me wrong, those are great ways to spend some time and devote some energy towards, a lemonade stand or a bake sale for a charity or a cause of your choosing. That's great. I think there was something a little obscure, a little innovative, a little niche about this soccer juggling idea that really captured people. And I don't think that anyone really ever questioned why I was doing it, because, maybe there were days where I was kind of like dragging my feet a little bit and a little tired, and I didn't want to sell soccer balls on the corner, to raise money for St. Jude, which I've done multiple times. But like, I just think because I was so genuinely motivated by the cause, that like that overpowered any sort of questioning or, any vibe that maybe I was being not super authentic. there was another thing that you said that I wanted to touch on about the awards and this idea of kind of like a transactional relationship, like using one person's achievements to get to the next place. And what I want to say about awards, at least the award programs and scholarship opportunities that I have been able to be a part of, is sure, maybe there is a part of these application and vetting processes that do really emphasize the numbers and the metrics and the impact and whatever, just to sort of make sure that, oh, is this person, actually dedicated? But the thing is that all of the people that I've connected with within these scholarship cohorts, they are also so genuinely motivated and not doing this for any sort of like external reason, really, that you can only reach those thresholds of impact if you are genuinely motivated. Kids who do things for, this is a really important subject, like college applications or requirements or whatever, they don't typically get to points where they are going to be in the running for a Diana Award. The kids that win those awards are genuinely motivated, and that's why they are successful. They aren't successful because they're doing it for, kind of not necessarily the wrong reasons, but like other reasons. It's like every kid that I've talked to that have been in these scholarship cohorts are genuinely passionate and motivated, and that's why they've been able to have the success and impact that they've had. So I don't really think any of the scholarship programs that I've been a part of have felt transactional, because I know that I'm surrounded by people who are genuinely motivated to give back. And it shows through their efforts, through the way that they talk to you, through the way that they are so inquisitive and curious and genuinely want to make connections and network, not in a superficial sense, but in a just, I want to be enriched by your story and be inspired and fulfilled by your mission. And that ultimately is going to accelerate mine. So I don't think I've ever thought about scholarship programs in that way, but it is important to address because I think that on the surface it can feel like that sometimes.
You touched on the fact that the people that win these awards, like the Princess Diana Award, are there because they genuinely care, and that means so much, or that it makes things so much better. Because again, unless we don't have these conversations, you think that Princess Diana Awards are like your competitors, or like they're people that you have to try and impress. But then again, it's like meeting you, and it's like, yeah, I have this, but I genuinely care about the mission, not so much the outside stuff, which can play a part. But then again, it's that personal motivation, or not personal motivation, but that motivation to play a big part, or play a role in something that needs attention to. So, and the interesting thing, the reason why I asked you like whether sometimes you feel like you can truly tell people like, hey, I'm juggling a ball, is that when I first started this podcast and this idea of talking to people, it took me a while before before I could truly tell people like why I was interested. Like, because I notice a lot of podcasts or shows, they only touch the surface level of a person, and I'm like, no, I want to know like Hollis, like, or I want to know a person as a personal level. And I don't think we do that enough with Gen Z, especially because again, it's so easy to focus on the highlight reels and not to
Yeah.
be the behind the scenes. So like when I tell people that, sometimes I don't tell the full story, or I'm like, do I really need to tell them this? I don't know. So I do appreciate you sharing that, because then again, it's like, yes, we have all the success, but it's like there are times where we can question ourselves, or the fact that we'll have these like, are we doing a good thing? Are we making the right decision? So that's really great. Now, a few questions before I let you go, because I know you are running an empire. But first thing, first thing,
That's very nice. That's very sweet.
you talked, first of all, so you talked about how you are working with St. Jude's Research Hospital. And another thing that's really important to you is that you like to oftentimes do more for people, or you like to, I forget the terminology. It's like you like to give more than you can receive.
Mhm.
Hopefully, wait, did I just make you sound
Give
selfish?
more than you get. I could
Yes,
definitely
I
do
think I
that.
think that's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like you're helping people, but you don't ever expect too much in return because you care so much about helping people. And you've obviously done a lot with St. Jude and raising money and raising awareness for an issue that is unfortunately common, especially among young people. But I want to ask you this, because I know you help St. Jude a lot, but tell me a bit about how St. Jude has helped you. Because yes, you're raising a cause, but even if, whether it's directly or indirectly, they can still help you become a better person. And maybe not just with financial or it's juggling for Jude, but maybe more on a personal level where it's like, okay, I saw life this way, but St. Jude has taught me this, and it's helped me understand life from a different perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, such a great question because I would just be a big fat liar if I sat here and said, I've really gotten nothing out of this except for, giving back and yada yada. And that is absolutely not true. I mean, there are things that Juggling for Jude has opened doors for me in ways that I am so grateful for and never would have happened if I didn't do this. And of course, that's not what motivated me, but I would be ignorant to sit here and say none of those things matter. No, they do. It's so important. At 12 years old, had my first big speaking engagement at St. Jude. I won the Jerry Nicholson Award in 2017, which is typically given to a young patient who gives back to the hospital. And I was honored to sort of be an exception that year for the 60th anniversary of ALSAC, which is the fundraising organization that runs St. Jude and is able to make it a nonprofit. And so I was awarded that year. And I met the CEO of Best Buy at the time. I met the CEO of the hospital, the CEO of ALSAC, was connected with, big company, corporate heads in the corporate philanthropic space. And then the next month, I was in Arizona speaking at the Williams-Sonoma Leadership Conference in front of all of Williams-Sonoma, Pottery Barn employees, et cetera. Like it would be, you know, and then to this day, the former CEO of Best Buy, who has now moved on to another incredible career, she is my mentor. She has gotten me a job and an internship before. I have now been connected with a number of other people that are really important in this space. And now that I have gotten to university and I'm in college and that sort of networking is important, I've gotten a lot of really incredible opportunities in the professional world. And I recently spoke at St. Jude's Next Gen event in June. That was the most recent speaking engagement that I did. And I was talking to a bunch of college kids, which was awesome. So refreshing because normally I'm the youngest person in the room. And I was like, this is great. You guys are my age. We can just chill, relax, and have a good time. And I was like, you're all college kids. I know some of you guys are looking for a job, an internship, XYZ. Let me tell you that I have been blessed with some of these opportunities because of the connections and the people that I've met in this space. And they have seen that from 9 years old, I have been committed to this cause. It has, I have developed what I have received aside from the connections and the networking is personal skills that I have taken into my life. Public speaking, which by the way, I think is one of like the top five, like most popular and common fears, like amongst, Americans at least. Like I think it's also maybe worldwide, but like public speaking skills, ability to network, resume building, social media, campaigning, blog posts, podcast interviews, like being on camera. What does a live interview look like? Asking people questions, which is something you're extremely adept to, but that's something that you learn through practice and through exposure. I've been exposed to these professional fields and ideas, and that is what I've received. I've received this, repertoire of professional expertise, and I'm still learning and growing, and I still have so much more to learn. And I'm not saying that I have my whole life figured out. Trust me, I don't. But I have a really good jumping point, and I've been set up with a lot of really great opportunities and been able to hear from mentors in this space who I don't think I would have been connected to without St. Jude and without my commitment to St. Jude. So you are so, mature in realizing and recognizing that, yes, I have gotten things from St. Jude. And I've also been blessed with incredible friendships and connections with St. Jude patients, which not only has fulfilled me on a personal level, but like, oh my God, those friendships have just made my life purposeful and have given me my why. And I know that that is sort of a cliche, but like, who can say that they found their why at 11 years old? I don't know. I think I did. Maybe I didn't know exactly what it was, and maybe I didn't know exactly what career I wanted to be in, but I had a why. I had a why. And I think that, we're talking to Gen Z here, like finding our why is something that is so hard and something that doesn't come naturally and maybe doesn't come so explicitly and perfectly tied up with a pretty little bow, but like it should exist and it does exist, but it's so hard to find sometimes. And that is what I've gotten. I've gotten my purpose, I've gotten my why, and that is something that I will forever be grateful for and never ever take for granted. So I think that it would be really, really, immature of me to sit here and say that I haven't gotten anything out of this journey because I absolutely have, and I'm very grateful for it.
For sure. And the fact is that you talked about not only the connections you've made, like you said, like this former CEO of Best Buy and everyone else, but then again, it's also like those personal connections. And I really love the fact that you brought those two things up because it reinforces the fact that regardless if you're the former CEO of a big company like Best Buy or someone who's working at St. Jude or a cancer patient, that everyone is a human being. And that's
Yeah.
not a low bar, it's an important bar, or it's an important thing to know, which I know can sometimes be easily forgotten because we're so fixated on titles and I guess like what we're known for. Now, you mentioned how a lot of the people growing up, or a lot of the people at St. Jude have had difficult challenges, and some more scarier and more difficult than others. Now, I know that you said that you couldn't relate to these people directly, but I do want to focus on your maybe if you're comfortable sharing the difficult journeys you have had. So I want to break it down into two parts. What would you say was a difficult challenge you're grateful for from a personal standpoint? And then what would you say is a personal challenges that you are grateful for juggling for Jude? In the sense where it's like you hated these days so much, or you thought that those were the worst days of your life. If only if you're comfortable sharing. I don't want you to share like your absolute darkest thoughts, but something that you're comfortable sharing where you're like, you hated these days, but looking back, you can sit here today and go, I'm grateful I went through these days. I hated them, even though hate's a strong word. I hated them, but I'm glad I went through it because I would not be the person I am today.
Yeah. I mean, I have one that comes to mind that I don't think is too dark, but I think it's very real and it's a very real part of this experience. And I think it's a struggle juggling for Jude related and personal related. And I've talked about this for a year now, but I was so blessed to have made connections. And I've talked about this with patients who I have seen grow up, graduate from high school, graduate from college, start a family of their own, even in some cases, and been able to celebrate with them the fact that St. Jude saved their life. And that has been so rewarding and so fulfilling. And my mom shared with me that she used to talk to my dad about, one of these times she's going to meet someone and connect with the family and the kid's not going to make it. Like that was like a fear of her. She was like, what is going to happen when she is faced with someone, when she loses someone? Like what, it's inevitable because at the end of the day, 4 out of 5 children in the United States survive from pediatric cancer. 1 in 5 don't. That is a huge, huge, huge number, considering how many children in the United States, United States alone, like we're not even getting into developing countries or worldwide, which is a far lower statistic and something that St. Jude is currently working on with their global initiative. But point is that there are so many kids that don't make it. And I had spoken to, patient families who had lost someone and moms and uh, you know, girls and boys who had lost classmates and friends and whatever. And I was connected with a little girl named Liv when I believe I was like a junior in high school. And her dad saw the fundraising work that I was doing and said, hey, my little girl, Liv, she's like 7 years old. She's being treated at St. Jude and she's getting into soccer. We would love to buy one of your Juggling for Jude soccer balls. And I sent him one, no questions asked, like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. He sent me back a few videos and photos of this little girl, Liv. They lived in Tennessee, of her juggling the soccer ball. And she was like probably the cutest and funniest little girl that I had ever seen. And literally, I could tell in one video and a series of photos that she was just a fireball of a girl. And she reminded me a lot of myself when I was her age, just like this, like kind of funny, a little bit, quirky, just like sassy girl. And we started FaceTiming, we started Zooming, we started texting because she had like a little iPad. And from there, our friendship was born. And we we stayed in touch as often as we could throughout 2023, but I noticed that her health complications were becoming more severe. And a week before I went to college and started a life and was opening the next chapter, and it was actually the day before my 19th birthday, Liv passed. And for me, those were some really dark days. Like those were just like really, really like grief is such a funny thing and everybody goes through it. Um, Liv's story is so special because her name is Liv, and Liv loved to live. That was what her dad had shared. That is what, they spoke at her celebration of life. That is what, all of the patients and family members and friends that were posting and sharing stories of her, they were like, lived, Liv just loved to live. And for me, I had just coming off a gap year. Um, I was dealing with a lot of personal things unrelated to juggling for Jude, but sort of, doing things in my life that really weren't like, I really wasn't appreciating myself, I think. And I was like really just preparing for college. And I think I was nervous. And I think I was just hyper fixating on things and not treating myself properly. And then this happened. And I was like, oh my God, I can't take my life for granted. Like, here I am starting this new journey in my life and going off to college and opening this next chapter, and her book just closed. Like, it was such a weird dichotomy that I was battling and confronting. And so those were some really dark days. But I think what's really important about that is, yes, this is juggling for Jude related, but it is so much more personal than that. And I think I realized like, I kind of got to get my stuff together. I got to like, live for Liv because she can't anymore. And screw, whatever the sort of like material and superficial things that maybe I was worried about before. Like, I just need to live. And that is sort of something that I'm still working on, but something that I think about every night. And when I'm praying for Liv and her family and thinking about them and all of the other families just like Liv's, like I just got to live. And so I think that those days, that's what really made me come out the other side and really value life in a way and look at life in a way that I never have. Um, so I think that that's something that is connected to this journey, absolutely, but also a really personal thing that I went through, that has a lot of layers to it. And so yeah, I think that that's one I could share.
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about, and and I'm sure that while you're able to sit back, or not sit back, while you're here to talk about it, and I'm sure it was difficult, I couldn't imagine what it would actually look like, and I'm sure, it's difficult. Like saying it is one thing, but like when you actually experience it, it's really difficult. So I really appreciate you sharing that because it's never easy, and I'm also glad that you were able to have a that friendly conversation because sometimes when you talk to people that you're much older than, it's like older than this person, but you really develop those personal connections. My last question before I let you go, I think the reason why that question is so important, like what are you most grateful for, even those difficult times, is that sometimes, and you, when we first met, you said one of your biggest enemies is yourself, like the evil version of you in any way. And it's weird because I've had professional soccer players on this podcast, but ironically enough, I've never asked them this question, so I'm going to pose it to you, which is that you said that your biggest enemy is yourself, but tell me how you know that even with those challenges or the journey that you went through and still going through, tell me how you know if you're winning or you're losing. Because a soccer player can look at a scoreboard and say, okay, I'm winning 1-0, or I'm losing 5-0, or I'm tied. But in like the game of life, which I know is still philosophical, but I promise it's not a philosophical podcast, how do you know if you're winning, losing, or you're, I guess for lack of a better phrase, tied with yourself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, great question. I think that I spent a lot of time alone. And that's sort of how I realized like, wow, my biggest enemy really is myself. I think that the thing with Gen Z is that when we're growing up, we are constantly surrounded by other people. We are going to school and you are always in a classroom, you're always with other people, and then maybe you go to sports or an after school activity, and then maybe when you go home and you finish your homework and you eat your dinner, maybe with your family or not with your family, depending on your situation, like, and then maybe you go into your room and maybe you go on your phone or you do more homework or you practice your instrument or do some yoga or whatever you do to wind down. You are just never really left alone with your thoughts, ever. You really aren't. And I never was. Like, I people say like COVID or like COVID, we were so isolated. My God, COVID, we were trying to distract ourselves in whatever way possible to escape being alone. We didn't want to be alone. So we're on social media, we're playing video games, we're going on walks, we're connecting with our family, we're, Zooming with our friends, we're doing whatever we could. So we really weren't ever alone. And when I took a gap year, I was alone a lot. And I was really, really forced into this world of like, what does solitude mean? What does it mean to truly be left alone with your thoughts and be okay with that? Be comfortable with not having any sort of external stimulus. And that is the most important and valuable life skill that I have learned is being alone. But that's also when I sort of figured out that like I am my biggest enemy. When there is no one else around, when there is no one else telling me or determining my success or dictating how I feel or whatever. And I used to just, you can demonize and vilify, coaches and teachers and family members or mean girls or whoever. And yes, those are people that might be undermining your success, but ultimately you are the one person that is going to determine whether or not you are winning or losing, as you're saying. But the thing with winning and losing that I have sort of realized with being alone is that I don't really think I'm ever fully winning or losing. I think I'm either just like almost working with myself or working against myself. You know what I mean? It's like I'm either, sort of like leaning into some of those challenges and confronting them head on and being like, I feel like I'm making myself lose right now. Why? Why am I doing that? Why am I overthinking this? Why am I forcing myself to do this? Why am I like, if you're constantly putting yourself into question, I think that it's easy to figure out why you feel like you're losing. I don't think you ever are losing. I just think that you need to figure out, why am I feeling like this? Like, why am I feeling bad? Why am I, reflection is so important. And so I think that the way that I know if I'm winning or losing, and if we want to look at it that way, like I think just constantly putting your values and yourself, on the stand, call them to the podium, just be like, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? Who is telling me to do this? And if no one is, then don't do it. Like, quitters, I don't think that quitting, I think it has such a negative like stigma around it. It's like, we stop doing something because we know that it's not good for us. That's not quitting. That's just a redirection. Like like you can't, I really don't think that when you really are at peace with yourself and you're constantly talking to that inner voice, I don't think you're ever really winning or losing. I think you're always just progressing. And, I heard a quote the other day that was like, a step back is just taking a step forward in the right direction. So I think that there is, maybe there is winning and losing in your mind, but if you can sort of reframe it for yourself, I think that you're always winning in a way.
Yeah, well, first of all, that was a really deeply philosophical answer, but
Yeah.
that was great. It was great. And here's the thing. I know that you and I are not professional athletes, but that doesn't mean the fact
Oh,
that we can, we're not athletes, but that doesn't mean that we can still learn a few things from sports in general. So
yeah.
Hollis, yeah. So yeah, that was a great answer. So Hollis, I know that you are very busy, so I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. It was so great talking to you. I think you're someone who I love talking to, not just on the podcast, but off the podcast. But continue doing the amazing work that you're doing, and I hope we get to meet in person one day. I feel like you're one of those people that you could talk for hours, so I love being able to interact with people like that.
Thank you. And I just want to say I've done, and this is like, you could totally quote me on this. I've done a lot of podcast interviews, and this was one of the most refreshing and meaningful and fulfilling ones. So thank you for just really getting real, and I really appreciate it. You are such a wonderful host and have a really great podcast. So everyone should listen. I will definitely be listening because this was awesome. So thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.